And how many of you are familiar with that passage of the gospel from Mark where it speaks about Jesus during the time of his crucifixion as he's going on the way, he's carrying the cross, and it speaks about a particular man named Simon of Cyrene who was compelled, he was forced into helping Jesus carry the cross. Well, that passage has taken on a different meaning for me as a result of what happened to me one day. I came home and I walked into the house after a long day, and my mother greets me with, "Kyle, get over there and cut your daddy's toenails." I said, "Excuse me?" "Get over there and cut your daddy's toenails." Well, when she said that, I looked at my two brothers who were sitting on the sofa drinking soda pop and eating potato chips. I said, "What about these two jokers over here?" "Did you hear what I say? Get over there and cut your daddy's toenails." Well, given my experience, the way her tone of voice went on that last word, it was a matter of a decision I had to make. Either to continue to try and have a word game with her, to go back and forth with her with my words, or to do what somebody needed to do, to cut my daddy's toenails. So I dropped my book bag and went over and proceeded to cut my daddy's toenails. That was the first time in my life that I actually carried somebody else's cross apart from my own. And it wasn't a happy time, because my father wasn't the type of man that talked to my brothers and I about feelings. In fact, he used to tell us quite the opposite, that a man, you don't talk about your feelings, you don't cry, you just get out there and bring home the bacon. Just support your family. That's how you do it. So he had a very hard exterior about him, and there wasn't much other than that. But as it ended up, he suffered a massive heart attack that rendered him really incapable of doing a lot of things he always was able to do for himself. He was now dependent upon somebody else to do, one of which was to be able to cut his toenails. And I remember when I was kneeling down cutting his toenails, having a great amount of resentment in my heart about that, because I was thinking of all the times he may have not treated me the way I wanted him to treat me, or the way I would wish he would have treated me and my brothers. And I was just really resentful, very angry about it. But then as I was involved in this, I stopped and started thinking about not just myself, but I started thinking about my dad. Because my dad was a very proud man. And he really prided himself in doing things for himself. And no doubt the grace of the Holy Spirit enabled me to look at my dad in that moment and to say, "Look, you think you've got it bad, you think you're dealing with something right now? Think about him. Think about where he's at right now, having to allow his son to cut his toenails." And I did. And it was quite a breakthrough for me. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the movie The Passion of the Christ. And I really love the way they depicted the reality of Simon of Cyrene being forced to help Jesus carry the cross. And you remember in the beginning, Simon was remonstrating with the Lord. It's like, "What are you doing? I'm not a criminal. I'm not a criminal here. What you bringing me into this for?" But by the time all was said and done, by the time Jesus arrived at Calvary with Simon with him, Simon actually found great joy in being able to help Jesus carry that cross. And miraculously, over time, I grew to love cutting my daddy's toenails. In fact, it ended up eventually that I moved to live with my grandparents up in town in the central business district of New Orleans. And I would catch the bus. Well, actually, I had his car after. He couldn't drive anymore, so I ended up getting his car. So I would be able to drive back to him. And I would go like on a Friday. You know, on a Friday night, being in college, there were many things I could have been doing. But I chose to go and be there with my dad. And to do something for him that I'm sure he probably took for granted. But in those moments, I began to experience what I always desired from my father, but he probably didn't know exactly how to give it or how to express it. And that was his love. To just allow himself to be loved and to love me. And that circumstance was what God used to enable him and me to give to each other what we could not give to ourselves. The love of another man for another man. In the truest sense of the word. In the purest sense of the word. In the way in which Jesus himself expressed it. And that was a major, major breakthrough for me. Because up until that time, up until that day when my mother compelled me to stop thinking about myself and to think about my father by cutting his toenails, it opened me up to just how self-centered I was. In fact, every single relationship I was involved in always was calculated. I always would think, what's in this for me? If I give my time to this particular activity, or if I give my money to this particular movement or cause, what am I going to get out of it? That was always the way I thought. In fact, again, recently, in fact, it was right before we entered the Lenten season, a gospel reading coming out of Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 21 and following. It's about the man with the unclean spirit. And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him, and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching. With authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Beloved, you know one of the things that dawned on me. How is it that this man is in the synagogue, a place of worship, a place in which one comes to commune with God? How could he actually be in the midst of a community, in a place in which God is supposed to be at the center, and to not only be in there, but to be in there with an unclean spirit? How does one become possessed by an unclean spirit? And it hit me. And it hit me because I was there. And it was this. When I would go to Mass, when I would do anything that pertained to worshiping God, it was always in a way in which I was focusing on myself, again, going right back